The dogs circled the house all night, crying out, hunting. She knew they were calling to her, beckoning, working their churn. The world she lived in had become a gospel of disturbances, and the dogs wouldn't let her forget that. In the morning, before she had even gone to the spring house for milk, she saw a man waiting at the foot of her garden. It was how they did. Summer had spun away from them all. The creek banks were whiskered with a nickel-shine frost, and she could smell the cooking fires laid down by the ones who called themselves the uninvited. Pig fat and smoke, scorched corn. There were more people at the camp every week, staking out tarps, drying fish seined from the river. They were drawn to her fields at the end of their seasonal migrations because of what had happened there some years before, because of their beliefs. She did not know if they planned to stay for the winter. The man's clothes were rust-rimmed and deflated. He wore a battered straw hat. Those who wanted something from her arrived at the brick house above the creek, the doctor's house they called it, a remnant from her father's time, and waited for her, always alone. She didn't care for ceremony, but ceremony was what they needed. Their silent arrival was part of a code they passed among themselves. It was the same for the Brubaker woman who prepared the bodies of the dead, and the man from Jack's Mountain who was known to hoard crystals of salt.
Hi, and welcome to So Many Books, So Little Time podcast. My name is Jodi Stapler. I'm an owner of a publishing company called Willow Moon Publishing, a podcaster, a voiceover artist, and an author. Stories are so important in our lives, and there are so many out there from independent authors and independent publishing companies that we may never find unless we trip over them on accident. So I started this podcast for people who love books and love to read, and to help bring more awareness to the indie books and authors of our time. So stay with me for So Many Books, So Little Time. We are speaking with Alyson Hagy today, award-winning author. She has 8 works of fiction, and we are talking about her newest one, Scribe. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me today, Jodi.
Absolutely. I have to say you are one of my new favorite authors.
Wow, thank you.
Yes, I not only read the book, but I also used the audiobook version. I prefer to listen to audios because I'm so busy, so I can listen when I'm going around the house. And it is so descriptive in such it's not a long book, but in that little bit in each chapter you get so much detail that I felt like I was really there.
Well, thank you.
So I really appreciated the book for sure.
I mean, I hope I was able to create that because I felt immersed in this woman's story in a really unusual way for me.
Well, the story itself is about a dystopian America after a civil war. It's really a timeless story, and you don't have a set time period for this story. Is that correct?
True.
Yeah. And what's very interesting is that it's a little bit of mystery. There's a little love story in it as well, but there's magic and ghost stories, and it's just very enthralling. So could you tell us a little bit about Scribe?
Yeah, so this was a different kind of project for me, and as I think back on it, because the book's been out for a few weeks now, and readers have been asking me really interesting questions. I think in a lot of ways I was writing this book for my parents and for my aunt. I hadn't really thought about it, but my aunt was the great storyteller and story keeper in our family, and she passed away about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
And I think I have always loved stories. I love how they're shared, and the culture I grew up in, we didn't even really make the distinction between, magic and ghost stories and stories about neighbors. Those kinds of things sort of blended together.
Yeah.
If you were really just sort of sharing things you thought were interesting. And I was driving on a road when I was home several years ago and just had this vision of this woman in this old home surrounded by old-fashioned paper and old-fashioned writing quills. And I thought, who is she? And that's not unusual for me. I would get sort of triggers like that. But I think what was different is when I really started to think about her, I realized that people were coming to her and asking her to write letters. And as soon as I started taking some notes on that, Jodi, and thinking about it, these stories started to sort of come to me. The book is so much in the bones of my past and my family's past and the past of the house that I grew up in, which is also kind of a character in this in some ways.
Yeah.
And I just, for once in my life, I just let it happen. I didn't try to control it because this is not the kind of fiction that I would normally write. I like to do a lot of research, so I like to know exactly when books are set and exactly what the historical context is going to be and sort of what everyone's motives are. And, I try to approach it as clearly as I can. And this book just took off from this strange woman who has people visiting her, asking her to write letters. And it was clear to me pretty early on that when she wrote letters, unusual things would happen. It wasn't just going to be a matter of sending a letter from one place to another, but that she was going to be able to write down truths about people that would have some kind of power. And once I got that idea in my head, I just went with it.
Right. Which it's kind of her superpower or her magic that she has about her. And that's, I think, what makes it even more interesting. It's because the society itself are filled with people that no longer can read and write. And the fact that she can makes it even more special.
It's true. It turns out that even in this sort of degraded culture, and it's based, on some reality. I mean, the 1870s and 80s in Appalachia after the American Civil War would have been pretty deprived and very not literate. But I'm old enough to remember the middle part of the last century when a lot of people I grew up around still didn't read and write. And so you would need to go to a preacher or a lawyer or a school teacher if you needed to have something written down. And so I just started exaggerating that. But you're right. The idea that a woman could have a power that's not a physical power,
Yeah.
but could be a very important one was really compelling to me.
Right. Right. Where the pen is mightier than the sword.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that she is a strong character, but she doesn't have a name. So she could be anyone.
She doesn't. That was another really unusual thing for me. I tried to name her many, many times because I love character names. And I tried to name her sister. And I just couldn't find a name, not even a first name, that didn't feel like it was closing her off in some way. It's strange to say it because I enjoyed naming everybody else in the novel.
Yeah.
The end result, I think, is that she's sitting there more mysterious than ever, but maybe it does allow a lot of us to slip into her skin, which
Right.
would be okay. As a reader, I really like that.
Oh, me too. And there's something special about that. The two women in the story don't have a name set to them, but here are all these men in the story. It's a very feminist view of the book, really.
I guess it is. I wasn't really conscious of that. I did know Hendrix showed up immediately. So I thought, okay, we've got this man. I don't even know who he is and what he wants, but he wants something desperately from her.
Yeah.
And that's always a good baseline situation for a story, particularly if you have a male and a female involved. But there was so much I didn't know. And in the second paragraph, the uninvited appeared on the other side of this creek. And I thought, oh my goodness, I am in over my head. But I need to figure this out because they are honoring something that happened on that land. And I don't know what it is, but I really want to find out.
Wow. So it seems like almost like this just like it was speaking to you.
So I have not written a lot of novels in my day, and each one has come in a different way, but this one very much did come that way.
Yeah.
I'm living out west, but I just tried to plug myself back into the sounds of the language from home, Southwest Virginia, and it really did start coming. And I started borrowing family stories and regional stories and old folk tales. But I even just made up some stories because I thought I just have to keep this going. I have to figure out a way to weave a world together that matches this woman. And she is tough.
Yeah.
And strong. She's also very wounded in the way that I guess most of us are. And I wasn't entirely sure what her bad deeds had been for a while either. But I knew I was going to be writing about siblings, and that's another thing that you can kind of write about endlessly. Well, with good reason. I think siblings are the greatest gift in the world, and sometimes we can be very heavy burdens for one another. So there's
Right.
plenty to think about.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, as I was listening, I listened to the story first, and as I was listening, each character, like at 1 second, I'd be like, okay, so they're the good, that's the good person, that's the good character, and then all of a sudden I'd be like, wait a minute, is she a bad person? Is he a bad person? They're very well rounded characters. They're not one dimensional one bit. They are like a real person.
I wanted that to be true, and I think for her, I knew there was much goodness and much longing for love within her, that she had walled herself off from the world to live alone for some set of reasons I need to understand. With Hendrix, who comes to visit her, I think I knew he wasn't who he said he was.
Yeah.
And I was sure that he had been a very tough guy in a lot of ways. But I did set out to try to say to myself, if I believe this, and I think I do, that people can redeem themselves by speaking what they've done wrong as a kind of first stage for forgiveness, but then also changing their lives by focusing in some different way. And for both these characters, they've walled themselves off from love. And as soon as they allow that to begin to happen, they are able to change the course of their future, at least a little bit. And I like that idea.
Oh, me too. Yes, and I loved. Okay, so we have a couple different characters that are brought in. We have Billy Kingery. Am I saying
Kingery.
that right? Kingery, and then we have the uninvited, which include the Altus, like clan, I guess, the clan of Altuses. So did these come from people that you knew?
Yes. So in some ways, yes. Now, Billy Kingery is really a character who takes a lot of inspiration from the devil figures in various folk tales, some of them the Jack tales from Appalachia, but various folk tales that I grew up and even read about. So he is kind of informed by old storytelling more than regular living human beings. The Altuses, on the other hand, so I grew up and, we had our patch of land, and it's still very clannish where I grew up, and everyone knows who's related to whom, and everybody tends to settle in the same area so that generations will live next to one another. And so we had families, they weren't actually Altuses, although there are plenty of Altuses where I grew up. And almost all the names I use, Brubaker, Kingery, are all old names from Southwest Virginia because I just like those names. But the clans, those behaviors that you see where people are asking for something or hoping to make a deal or very prickly about who's on their property and what's happening, that's all very true to, I think, the way I grew up.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, my grandparents are from that area as well. And when I first heard the name Altus come on, it sounded like my grandmother's name is Altizer.
Okay.
And so when you first said that, and I know that there's a big history of Altizer, there's a Altizer like fight that was, pretty bad, I guess, back in the day, and guns and all that. So first thought was, ooh, I wonder if that's linked.
So that it would be great to know whether the Altuses in my part of the world, maybe they are spin-offs.
Right.
I love that. Well, the Hatfields and the McCoys, who a lot of people know about. So, they did their fighting probably 75 miles from where I grew up, close to where my parents grew up.
Yeah.
That's fairly recent, within the last 100 years or a little bit more. And, those sort of blood feuds, they still linger. There's a lot of, you can call it holler justice or backcountry justice that still rules the day.
Yeah,
anyway,
absolutely.
It was fun to think about, again, what I think are sort of the strengths and the weaknesses. So you have Uncle Willem Altus, who's probably a pretty upright guy, but then his brother Alton is a drunk and somebody who tries to take advantage of all these situations. And I have to admit, too, Jodi, when and this just happened one day early when I was writing. I just suddenly saw these two boys, both Frayne and Tull, just sort of walked right into the story.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know what these two are going to do, but this is going to be fun, because when you have these sort of Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer kinds of characters show up, it's usually pretty interesting. So they were a lot of fun to try to figure out too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love them. But I also, you have to bring up Estefan.
Yeah, yeah.
Estefan. And who does he represent, do you think?
Partly he represents the many, many children who've been lost to the fevers. In my mind, there's been some sort of souped up fever, measles epidemic that has taken almost every young child there is. So Estefan is the oldest child in the camp of the uninvited. So he survived. We don't really know who his parents are. But I think he also represents a sort of future where young people will grow up and not be so hindered by whatever the past troubles of the war and the fevers have been. And certainly for the main character in the novel, he's the opportunity for love. He doesn't want anything from her, but he's so joyous. He plays his trumpet. He comes and asks her for things occasionally, and she's finally allowing her cold heart to warm up a bit.
Yeah.
And so he's really a kind of innocence and a representative of how good the future can be if these people can get over their the sort of deprivations of the past.
Right.
That's how I see him anyway. And
Yeah.
he's got that darn trumpet that he loves to play. Like my brother had one like that, and he was so terrible on it. But it was kind of unforgettable, So,
Right. Right. Well, and we should say that the uninvited are there because they believe that the woman and her sister were healers and that there's something in that house that can heal people and is kind of magical.
They do. And I think that one of the things that was fun about this book is I was like, I don't have to explain that. I really do think that the healer had some powers. Now, she isn't really the one who stops all of the fevers probably, but she cares for many, many children. And finally, they start to survive. But certainly their father had been a kind of healer. And I do think these skills get passed down. Mm-hmm. And the older sister is willing to go into these camps and willing to help people when they're very sick and put her own life on the line again and again and again. And she does provide a kind of power. And then when she dies, it's considered a great loss among those people who have been wandering after the fevers. And they believe that her goodness is something to be worshipped. So they sort of start doing that. Can be a danger. It's a political danger to the powers that be, or if you're Billy Kingery,
right,
really don't want people liking someone with a good power like that, because they'll get in the way of your sort of the politics that you want to have do.
Yeah.
But I think that the woman who writes the letters has a kind of version of healing power. She just has much harder time accessing it than her sister. And I think that, to me, one of the things to think about in the books is when you have a lot of siblings, and I grew up with several, we always are measuring ourselves against one another, and that can be so dangerous. But we can also learn things about abilities we didn't know we had by being around brothers and sisters as well. So I think that sometimes when we're with siblings, we see our great failings, and that's one of the things that the scribe of the novel tends to focus on. It's only later in the book that she realizes that her letter writing can be as powerful as the sort of medical healing that her sister has.
Absolutely. And it's almost like her sister's ghost
Yeah.
comes to try to help her, but she's seeing it as, or at least that's how I took it. She's seeing it as a bad thing, and her sister's trying to get at her.
Yeah. She reads it immediately as she's coming to punish me, rather than she's coming to say, there's some things you can do and some things you must do, and let's get ready for those. And please recognize what powers you have. And I think the novel isn't explicit about this, but that includes being a good neighbor to the uninvited, allowing wandering migrants onto your land over the winter if they wish to stay, but also loving some little boy like Estefan.
Yeah. There's so many underlying emotions and thoughts throughout this story that makes it so real. It makes it like a story that you're hearing about your neighbors or someone in your family. Um, there was one quote that really stuck out to me, and maybe because I'm a mom, but it's on page, let me look here. I think it was page 99, right towards three-quarters down in the book. It says, it's when the sister comes to her, it kind of in her thoughts. She's hurt. She's having these delirious thoughts, or the ghosts are there. You're really not sure how it is, but she says to her sister, um, "Do you think we will become good mothers?" And her sister says, "That depends on whether we nurture souls of falcons or of ants."
Ooh, I remember writing that and thinking, I don't quite know what that means, but I sort of do know what it means. I mean,
Yeah.
don't we as women ask ourselves this in small ways all the time? Am I making the right choice with a child? Do I have a tiny hard-shelled, crabbed sort of soul, or do I have a kind of soaring soul or nobility? Will I be able to let my kids go when they need to be let go?
Right.
Or will I shelter them in the wrong ways? And I just thought to myself, we know they had those kinds of conversations
Yeah.
with themselves. And then when they're faced with not having children of their own, but seeing all the children that they can think of in their neighborhood or whatever beginning to die of these fevers, that they just feel so tested because they can't fix it. But the one sister keeps thinking, I must try. I must try. There has to be a way to heal these children. And she's so driven by the positive instead of the negative. And her sister is the one who kind of wants to quit.
Yeah.
And I feel like those essential character traits are buried in us all, Jodi, and bad times bring them out.
Mm-hmm. The story itself is, of course, the main hero. She writes these letters, and but she's a loyal person. She follows and keeps her word.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that she needs to get Hendrik's letter to whoever he needs it to get to, so that he can heal himself or feel like he's what's the word? Forgiven, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's true. And, at the very start of the book, she doesn't want to make that kind of journey. She used to do it a lot. She's gotten a little older and feels like the world's a little more dangerous. But she also lives in a world where you make a promise, you have to keep it. We sort of have to self-govern in this world because there's no one else who's going to make you or not make you do something. But she will lose her business if she doesn't keep her contracts. I think that's what she's considering. So she tries to give Hendrix the hardest task she can think of. This is a sort of a fairy tale sort of thing. The hardest thing that he has to do for her before she'll agree to make this great journey on his behalf. And she thinks he'll never be able to do it. He'll never be able to go out and get this thing that I want. But in the way of lots of fairy tales, he in fact is able to achieve the task because he's more cunning and more canny and more skilled as a hunter than she thinks. He's not this poor old farmer guy that she's been led to believe. So then she has to go on the journey because she's made a promise. He kept his side. She's got to keep hers. And she doesn't like it, and she's worried about the journey. The only good piece is that she's carrying essentially his forgiveness. If she takes this letter that he has dictated to her and that she has memorized and takes it to this crossroads far away and speaks it to the person who needs to hear it the most, he will be healed in some way. So that's, she sees as she's got to do it. She's got to do it. And then, of course, Billy Kingery decides to make that journey as hard as he possibly can.
Right. He, of course, appoints himself as the law of the whole area. And he's kind of, I guess, he's who people go to when they need a favor, they need something, or to get across his land. And so him and his bargain men are kind of people to be feared.
Yes. Yeah. He does govern by fear. And I think when, you asked me if he was based on someone real, not in the sort of, face and hands and local history, but I do think there wasn't and hasn't been up in the mountains, you know this, a lot of government at times.
Yeah.
These are people who never really liked the federal government from the get-go. They left Scotland or England or Germany to get away from princes and kings. So they kind of like being left to their own devices. But often in those communities, you still get people, and then sometimes they're the tradespeople,
Yeah.
right? The people who are bringing the flour or the sugar or the molasses or the cloth, the things that you need, even if you want to live off by yourself. And they can acquire quite a bit of economic power and then political power if they want it. They can become strongmen. And I think that you could go almost anywhere in America and find versions of that, where people just kept slowly accruing influence and power, and pretty soon you can't really do anything in a certain locale without passing it by the big man first.
Right. Now, normally when you write a story, do you outline it? Do you develop your characters? How do you go about your writing process?
If it's short stories, I don't do formal outlining. With novels, I usually do. I try to figure out where I'm going and at least have some sense of what each chunk is going to do. Scribe didn't quite come out that way. I had to write probably close to the first half before I had an inkling of what the second half was going to be. And I did not know how it was going to end. I have written novels where I've known the end when I started, which is, I have to say, a great relief.
Yeah.
Because writing toward it, this I didn't know.
I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
I didn't. And once I got halfway through, I thought, okay, she's going to have to make this journey. She's going to have to leave this house that she doesn't want to leave, that she's been in for years and years and years, and which is it's a haven and a protectorate for her. And she's going to have to go on the road. What's this journey going to look like? What do I need to tell readers about this journey? And I really took a leap, and I decided, this is going to be more of a fantastical journey than she walked 5 miles this day, she walked 8 miles the next day. Because I tried to write it that way, and it just wasn't working very well. I wanted to think of this as a tale. And a lot of times when we have tales, they don't tell us a lot of the machinery. A character just suddenly walks into a dark wood and stuff begins to happen. There's not a lot of backstory, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And since I already had some magic, I already had a ghost and a few other things, I thought, if she goes to visit Billy Kingery and makes a bargain with him, that will he or will he not let her pass so she can go to this crossroads? Something will happen with Billy Kingery, and it will tell me what needs to happen next. I just know she's going to be pursued the whole way on this journey. It's going to be really hard, and she's going to have to be on the run. And so that was true, but there was no outline. And every time I tried to write what I'd call big, normal, explanatory scenes, they weren't coming out right. So I went for something much more driven by the unreal, the fantastical.
Yeah. Well, I did not want it to end. And I don't want to reveal the ending because I want people to go out and look for the book and read it themselves. But I did not want the story to end. I wanted a second book afterwards. I was like, oh, I can't wait to get into this series. So unfortunately, I don't see that happening. But I guess it could with the other characters. You could bring some.
There are maybe some possibilities. Yes, I mean it's so funny. It was. I don't usually think of writing novels as a pleasure. Like, I like doing it, but it's often really difficult.
Yeah.
So much of this book was sort of fun because it was discovering that sense of wonder that I remembered when people told me stories or when I read them. And so I really wanted to convey that to readers when I could. And I love the idea of this woman helping people tell their stories and lifting sort of guilt and sorrow from them. So I don't know. Can I do something with that in the future? We'll see.
I hope so. I do. I honestly, I'm gonna have to pick up your other books and start reading them because I just did not want this to end.
Well, thank you.
It was like sitting there and listening to old stories that my grandparents would tell me, It really was. And and yet I felt like I was there in the story.
Oh, wow.
So I appreciate it. Thank you so much for writing this.
Oh, well, thank you for being interested and for being willing to fall into a story like that, Jodi. I'll say too, I think Shannon McManus, the audio version is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Enjoyed
She does a great job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So where are you? What's next? Are you working on something else right now?
I am so superstitious about this. I'm working on some short stories and have been for a while. I'm in a kind of funny waiting space. I usually have a book kind of queued up pretty seriously before I tour for whatever book is coming out because there's a long lag. And I've tried to start something and it hasn't been working. So I'm going into a kind of listening space and reading a lot and just kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. So I don't, which is again unusual for me. And I think Scribe came so much from deep inside my past and my family's past. I just kind of need to be quiet for a little while and see what might fill that up.
Right.
I'm loving reading, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Oh, well, I don't know how you're going to follow this one up. I really don't. It was amazing. But where can everybody find the book? Where can they find you?
Oh, so I'm kind of easy to find. I have a website, alysonhagy.com, and you can contact me through that. I also teach at a public university, so I'm pretty easy to find and happy to have people contact me at any time. I'm on Facebook as well. The book is at, I think, really every independent bookstore in the country. I've gotten tremendous support from the American Booksellers Association and in particular the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance. They've been featuring it all winter, and that's a really good thing. You can also find it on Barnes & Noble and Amazon, and I think Target and lots of places. There is a Kindle version available and an audio and I think an MP3 CD set as well.
Wow, nice. Perfect for the holiday season. So definitely.
I hope so. Yeah, my publisher has been really, really wonderful.
Good.
And I will say too, it's a paperback original, so it's not very expensive as books go. So if people are curious, maybe they'll feel like they can take the leap.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me today and speaking with me about your book. And it has given me such pleasure to read it, to speak to you, and to really dig in deep to the story.
Oh, thank you, Jodi. You're a great interviewer. What a wonderful podcast. Congratulations on the many things you do. And I look forward to hearing from other writers as you interview them because you're fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much.
Take care. Happy holidays.
Pick up Scribe by Alyson Hagy, a haunting, evocative tale about the power of storytelling that draws on traditional folk tales and the history and culture of Appalachia. I want to thank Alyson Hagy for joining me today and sharing this fabulous story with me. And I want to thank you for joining me on So Many Books, So Little Time. Let me know what books you're reading, what authors I should interview, and give me your suggestions and comments. Make sure you subscribe to So Many Books, So Little Time podcast so that others can find me and all the great indie books and authors that I'll be sharing throughout this podcast. You can join me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at So Many Books, So Little Time podcast, and you can check my website out at jodistapler.com or email us at somanybookspodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for joining me, and come back next week when we delve into another story.